The question is, how far do we develop it in particular directions? And I, in particular, am going to talk about my hobby, StarCraft, and how I hope that is helping me develop myself. I did also get a PhD in star formation, so that might make me an expert here. And I'll start by just going back to the animal kingdom that I mentioned earlier, and we'll see some playing going on. Now, I think this is a nice link to Leonie's talk from before. Many times when we play games or do things, they have no obvious utility at first, right? There's no immediate survival value in doing this super marathon running. There is no immediate survival value in playing video games. And here you see these cute little guys playing. They are practicing, of course, something which at the end will be very deadly and essential to their survival, but here it just looks like a waste of time and great fun. For me, something similar that I do with my pals is StarCraft. StarCraft is the most popular real-time strategy video game in the world. So it has, let's say, 2 parts by now. The first one came out in 1998. StarCraft II came out in 2010. And combined, the two have sold around 18 million copies. So that might sound like a small number, but most of that is in the developed world among a very limited age group. So actually, statistics predict that here in the audience there will be, well, actually 0 StarCraft players. But how about everybody who's an active StarCraft II player, raise your hands. Oh, excellent. Welcome. I think this is a biased sample though, because there was an announcement there would be a talk about StarCraft. So still, there are very few gamers, but enough to have a very vibrant community, and we'll get to that later. Now I'll just introduce the game. So what you see here is the old version, the new version, of a main base. So what happens in a strategy game that's real-time is usually you need to build up an economy. This economy you need to build up the money to get an army. The army you need to destroy your opponent. It's very simple. Economy, army, destroy opponent. And if your army fails, you just build another one, you get more economy, and you try again. Or you die. There is a little bit more detail, and since Blizzard, the company that came up with StarCraft, has done an excellent job explaining the basics of the game, I will let them go through it first. So, the main elements of an economy you see here. This is a command center. It's kind of like your town hall. You see these little red guys. These are workers. They're gathering minerals. The blue things are minerals. Next to the minerals are 2 Vespine geysers. So there you get gas. These are the 2 main resources which allow you to build stuff. Now, the following minute will possibly be a bit fast. So just try to follow this voice that's going to explain to you what the game is all about.
Opponents. You will begin each match with a simple base and a limited number of workers. Use workers to gather resources. Resources are needed to expand your base and to train combat units. To overcome your adversaries, it will be necessary to assemble a formidable military force. Developing a strong economy to a variety of units, each with a set of special abilities that will allow it to fill a specific. For example, the Terran's Vikings are capable of fighters, granting them parallel mobility. The towering Protoss Colossus excels at traversing steep elevations with ease and devastating opposing ground forces. Zerg infestors may control the minds of their enemies, turning opponents' units against each other.
Alright, thank you, Blizzard. So again, this just went over the basics of the game. It looks like a huge mess. There's a lot of action going on, lots of different units running around, tanks shooting here and there. But it's all about building an economy, building the workers, building the army, and destroying your opponent. You are not any one character in this game. So you are the one who's controlling all of these armies. You don't identify with anyone, but you can develop. If you play many battles, your own skills develop, and there is a kind of objective ranking system which tries to quantify that. At the core of your game is your strategy. So when you go into a match with another person online, you think, okay, how am I going to destroy this other person? It may be that you want to build up a small army extremely fast and surprise them and really catch them off guard and destroy their economy because their workers are very weak. You may have a long-term strategy which involves building many bases as fast as you can to get lots of income and then build a huge army. You may want to take into account, the terrain that you're playing on. So here you see a map at the top left. And your army composition becomes relevant. There's also an entire thing which is called the metagame, which basically means you study the background of your opponent. If you're a professional player, we'll see some professional players in a short while. You will study their matchups against players similar to yourself, and you will see what strategies they usually employ. In what order do they build their buildings? In what order do they build their units? And then you prepare and customize your game for that team. And another very important element in the game is scouting. So no matter who you're playing against, once you start, in the beginning you don't have much, but you have to decide in what order do you construct your structures, in what order do you start researching things to get access to new technologies. So if you send out one of your little workers and you manage to sneak them into the opponent's base, you can see what buildings they're building. So that gives you information again about what you should be doing. So all of these elements make the game immensely entertaining, but also immensely challenging to play at a high level. So there's lots of fun for players of all competences. One interesting detail about StarCraft before we move on. This is a map of the Korean peninsula. So there's North Korea in the north and South Korea in the south. And it's a nighttime image. So you see that at nighttime the South Koreans are doing something. All of the country is lit up and they're actually playing StarCraft. So in Europe, currently there are 1.2 million StarCraft accounts active. And Europe has a population of what? Something like some hundreds of million, 500 million, 600 million, something like that. At least the European area in the StarCraft server system. Whereas South Korea has, I think, South Korea and Taiwan combined have around 900,000 accounts. So that's almost the same number, whereas the population is 10 times smaller. So for some reason, StarCraft really took off, especially in South Korea. And so this is reflected also here on the right-hand side where the game is asking this guy to get more minerals because he's running out of stuff to produce, and well, North Korea has similar problems. All right. Now, something that happened in South Korea and also elsewhere in the world is that a professional gaming community developed. So this is not only StarCraft, there are many other games, but in particular I know about this community a little bit. In South Korea, there are audiences of tens of thousands of people for high-level games between professional players. I myself, with my friends, we watch tournaments online sometimes between top players. And some of the guys that are really dedicating a lot of their young lives to StarCraft look like this. So this is Idra. He's a kid from the US. He was already playing StarCraft I when he was very young, but now when StarCraft II came out, he started playing StarCraft II. And you see his evolution here from around 2010 to around 2012. So he actually looks pretty decent for somebody who spends the vast majority of his time playing StarCraft. And the reason that he's like this is because he's a top athlete, in a way. He plays in a team. These teams have sponsors. He doesn't have to worry about lodgings. He doesn't have to worry about where he gets food or who arranges his travel when they go to big competitions. They have coaching, they have incomes, and when they win contests, they get winnings. So for the past, let's say 2 years, this guy earned, or well, it's actually $63,000 in official winnings. So this is aside from all sponsorships, anything like that. And he's 23. And he's not the top player in the world. The top player in the world in the past 3 years has earned around $300,000. So he gave up the scholarship to go study theoretical physics to do this. It's professional sports in that sense, because professional tennis players, they have similar issues, right? They cannot finish university, for example, because they really have to invest their time into it. I'm not at that level. more the hobbyist. And I'll show you a few more examples of these top guys. So one important concept in the game is actions per minute. So this is a quantification of how many unique things you are doing per minute in the game. So this can be you with your mouse selecting a unit, telling them to go somewhere, at the same time pressing some keys on the keyboard to order some production to happen, things like this. I play at a rate of, I don't know, APM 30, 40 maybe. When it gets really intense, it can be higher if there's a battle going on. But the top players, if you really want to play in tournaments, you have to have APM of around 200. So that's a few actions per second in the heat of the battle. So you may wonder how this is possible. And this is one guy doing the APM around 200. You see his left hand on the keyboard, his right hand on the mouse. And this is how he's playing StarCraft 1. So pretty impressive. And this shows you that in addition to knowing all the details of the game, in addition to knowing all the strategies, all the units, how to beat your opponents, you actually have to have physical practice. You have to warm up your fingers. You have to certain things have to become second nature to you. Certain production routines on the keyboard, and people take this really seriously. And before I move to the part where we actually see what I think we can learn from this, or at least what I think I have learned from this game, I'll try to impress you a little bit more by saying there are even professional casters who earn their living with casting professional StarCraft games. So this is Tasteless and Artosis, our two famous guys. Very entertaining. This is a big audience at a tournament final. And these are some logos of professional gaming organizations, not only for StarCraft, but Major League Gaming, for example, is a very well-known one. So to get to the more personal note, this is the team that I play in. These are, with one exception, all Estonians. That's where I'm from. At the lower left, you see Reaper Dan. He's actually Dutch Surinamese. And he lives in Deventer. And all the other Estonian people live across the world. So for us, it's also a social thing. We get together online, we play against each other, or we play as a team against other people. We're on voice chat, we're trying to coordinate, and we're also catching up a little bit on what everybody's doing. So in the 21st century, playing StarCraft is also a way to do friend stuff with your global friends. And I'll give you a second to point at the screen. All right. An important side note still is manners. If you play, you do have a certain code of conduct as well. When you start a game, you say good luck, have fun, GLHF. GM means good manners. So here you see a guy who's losing, and before he exits the game, he says GG, that's good game. On the right-hand side, you see another guy that has BM, bad manners. When he's losing a game, well, I don't know if you can make that out, but he says something about FK, you're Terran Ball, you FKer. So that's bad manners, and if you're on the professional scene and you don't want to be known for that because people will start disliking you. Right, but I'm really hoping there will be some feedback on this because this is very subjective. Productivity. I have learned something about my own productivity by playing StarCraft. I'll introduce two playing styles. So one is turtling. A lot of beginning players do this. Basically means when you start building your base and your army, you try to make everything perfect. You secure your base against every possible attack. This guy has lots of tanks set up. He has anti-air turrets between the tanks. Some of the tanks couldn't move even if they wanted to. So there's no way for him to actually respond fast to anything elsewhere on the map, but his own base is very well protected. And you see his opponent, the purple thing at the lower left, has taken over most of the map that they are playing on. So this style basically confines you to within your own base and allows your opponent to do whatever they want. But people have this habit of wanting to make everything perfect before they attack their opponent. I'm going to make the perfect army, perfect unit composition, all my upgrades are done, everything is ready, and I will attack, but then it's too late. Because whatever you do to your opponent, they can recover faster than you can. So the other style is aggression. As soon as you have a certain minimum mass, a critical mass of units that can do something useful, you start putting pressure on your opponent. Here you see both guys in the very early game, they only have their main base, very small part of the map is taken up at the lower left. So you see green and red are the opponents. The one guy is moving out with only 2 units. He doesn't have almost anything in his own base. He's just moving out with these 2 units, and he's going, let's see, these are driving to the opponent's base, right? And he's going to try to do as much damage to the workers as he can, already a few minutes into the game. So this is aggression. This is putting pressure on your opponent, forcing them to react. And his opponent is doing, let's say, what's called a build order, an order of producing stuff, which is actually usually quite, or can be quite a strong early attack strategy. But he's even combating that with his very early pressure. So he doesn't need to make his base perfect because his opponent won't have anything actually to do against him later in the game. And his own base is completely exposed. All right. So I'm going to claim that these 2 playing styles, right, turtling and aggression, are basically expressions of perfectionism and productivity. So making your base perfect is a very visual representation of perfectionism. When you're trying to write a paper, for example, you don't want to send around the draft because everything isn't quite ready yet. You want to check this argument and this thing, and you still want to run those simulations and those models. I'm sure you experience it in your different fields of life as well. For me, it works this way with papers, or at least it used to work that way a lot. Productivity here with the aggression is more like, okay, this is what I have currently. I'm going to write this down already, and then I'm going to move on. So for example, when writing a paper, you could say you have a certain minimum criterion for yourself of when you start writing something. Like you say, every day I will write 1 paragraph for my paper. And then you sit down, and whatever factoid or reference about your work comes to mind, you put it down in the relevant section of your paper. You're putting pressure in a way outside of yourself and getting things out, making use of what you already have. Now, sometimes there's a caveat. You might think, okay, I'm actually trying to do this, but I don't have anything to write. But here, I think the problem is somewhere else. So I'll try to say what I think about how you can improve. Now, if you play StarCraft, or if you do anything else where you see that you have perfectionistic tendencies, then the first important thing is to become aware of it, right? For me, it's easy to become aware of it because I just start losing in StarCraft. Beyond a certain level of opponents, I just can't beat them, right? Because I'm just far too passive. So then I have to take action. For me, what helped is that I had friends who I was playing with who were saying like, okay, you have to do better because we are losing these games. Or if you want to improve, you have to get rid of this turtling. When writing a paper, similarly, you have to become aware that you have perfectionism, right? But I think once you identify perfectionism in one field of life, usually you have it everywhere. Now, is there any concrete advice for how to get over this? And I think, again, we can learn from StarCraft a little bit visually how you can do this. Because it's very easy there to set concrete benchmarks, like I was talking about these 1 paragraph a day. You can say, at the 10th minute mark in the game, no matter what happens, no matter what units I have, I will attack my opponent. And in the beginning, when you start doing this, being a perfectionist, you'll start losing a lot. And then the next factor comes in, which is analysis. Why am I failing then if I'm trying to do this? So you have to go back and say, okay, if I hadn't built all these anti-aircraft turrets, I would actually have much more resources to build an army. And if I'm able to attack at the 10th minute, it means that nobody has attacked me at that point. So I just had irrational fear of my opponent. I don't have anything to be afraid of. I should just focus on producing my army. This is, if you don't play StarCraft, it's difficult to explain this in more detail, perhaps. But you can set these benchmarks, and by watching your replays, you can identify the causes of what's going wrong. And this is also important in writing a paper. Why do you actually spend days and nights sitting down with a paper if you're not writing a single sentence? Something else is usually wrong. So either you don't have a clear idea of your goals, you don't have a clear idea of what your question is, what you're trying to answer with the work that you're doing, etc., etc. So reflection, analysis, really being honest with yourself, extremely important. And I think why I'm relating this to StarCraft is that here it's visual. You can really see it, and the consequences are very clear. I have one example of me seeing this in StarCraft and coming up with the idea of applying it to real life. So I made this talk in a similar way. I had a faint idea at some point of, okay, I'm learning something about myself by playing StarCraft. And I went to talk to the organizers of Nite, and I said, I think I could do a talk that introduces StarCraft and also says something about being productive. I didn't have a finished talk yet, it was far from perfect. We had a short run-through, but the organizers will tell you I just had basically a skeleton of slides at that run-through. And then after my PhD defense, I tried to develop this talk. Maybe it's not perfect, but this is, I hope to inspire you with this to go out there and apply lessons that you're learning about yourself in any field of life that you're involved in. And finally, I want to mention also another aspect of something that I'm learning and I don't have a clear lesson from yet in StarCraft, is teamwork. Because, so, we play as a team, I told you. We're not a professional team. We don't have coaching. We don't have leaders. We have people who in various situations emerge as leaders. And if we're in the heat of battle and we have 4 players against 4 players and we really want to win, we've had a losing streak, people get upset at each other. You start seeing different tendencies, different reasons why people play the game. There are various categories. One is social. Some people actually go into gaming, and this tends to be female gamers, for social reasons, right? To interact with others. It's also important for me. There's the competitive aspect. Some of us are hyper-competitive. Some people be like, why aren't you as competitive as me? You should practice this and this, and you should know these build orders by heart. And it's understandable because from their point of view, that's the main reason for playing the game. Keeping, really climbing as high as you can, as fast as you can, and not just sitting around enjoying the nice graphics and chatting with your friends. And there's the storyline aspect. Some people go into gaming for just knowing all the units and getting into the world of which is a fantasy world, and this relates also to escapism, which I would even put as a separate category of why people go into gaming. And I think usually there are more problems perhaps with other things in people's lives. Yeah. So this is again our team, just to remind you that we have very different personalities and people in here. And actually, I would just leave you here with my propositions and plans for the future of what I want to get out of this, and I hope that we can open the floor for some discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihkel. It was a very personal and inspiring talk, and I'm sure that there are some questions about either gaming or... Yeah.
Hey, good evening. I couldn't help but notice that these persons that you presented that was the champion and actually yourself have a kind of improbable fitness to your bodies that is not expected from video game players. So can you tell us the story of this? How do you combine this with your expertise and motivate your training?
Sorry, can you repeat the last
How do you motivate your fitness training in relationship with your training online?
Well, thank you for your kind words. I would say I think it's important to improve in all faculties of life. So I play once or twice a week, but I also try to do sports and other things once or twice a week. I think it's important to keep a good balance and just try to have skills learned from one field or the other and apply them everywhere, just like I try to do here. So thanks for the question.
I have a question regarding rewards, because probably why you play is as much as a reason what you want to get out of it, because you're learning along the way, but I guess when you play and you reward yourself, that is also part of the learning curve. Can you say something about that?
Right, so as I kind of alluded to also at the end, there are these various categories of reasons why people get into gaming. I think for me the competitive aspect is definitely not negligible. It's nice to see yourself improving. There's a ranking system, you can climb on a ladder. I also said the social aspect is important. I wouldn't be playing StarCraft weekly at this point if I didn't have my friends to play with. because it's the only thing which we can really do together regularly, which is not just Skyping or emailing. So, yeah.
Back.
Okay, so there are two types of people who use Facebook. There are those who play Farmville and those who are really annoyed by all the updates they get from people who play Farmville. So can you say something about how Facebook, I mean there's all these game strategy, actually these types of games, except maybe not real time, but how they're affecting this, because they must be bringing a lot of new players into this type of, this kind of concept of game.
So just to be sure that I understood correctly, is your question that how the popularity of Facebook is affecting
because you see adverts all the
gaming
time.
population?
Yeah, basically strategy games on Facebook, that must be much more popular now actually than these games even, because so many people are using Facebook. So does that have a noticeable effect?
I wouldn't be able to tell you how much Facebook games have affected the StarCraft gaming population, but certainly video gaming in general is becoming much more a part of our culture, and the scene is expanding. Also the gender ratio is improving, I should mention. So there is clearly a global trend anyway for more video gaming. Also the age groups are shifting, right? We don't have a generation at this point that has really grown up with games like this. But the oldest professional players that really compete regularly are in their 30s. So these are among the top 100 or 200 players in the world. And I think I can't give you an answer to your question, but I will say that the demographics of the gaming scene are changing and evolving constantly. I think our children already will see us still playing computer games, right? And yeah, who knows what those games will be like exactly, but.
By improving the gender ratio, you mean more women?
Yes.
So, can you repeat the question?
Is it just StarCraft II you're playing, or do you play other games as well?
I do play other games as well. If you mean video games, then at the moment none, but I used to be an avid fan of games like Civilization and Colonization. But if you mean just games in general, I play board games like Settlers, and I play squash and stuff. So.
One last question.
I just want to ask a critical question. I'm not a StarCraft player, not gonna do it either, but I think you took a lot of it out of the game with the presentation. I really liked it. So why don't you quit playing now? Because you learned everything already about it. I would still think it's a bit of a, after a while, waste of time.
You have a point, but I think most of the really fun things we do in life, you could then say are a waste of time. So I think not everything has to be about producing and or at least not producing in real life and contributing to the economy directly. Right? Life quality matters. So if it makes me happy, then and it's not hurting me, I do not think so much. So I think this is an important part of our lives.
On that note, I think it's a really positive note, and thanks for all your questions. Thank you very much. Also for you, Nite of Pop Culture, the comic group. Very appropriately, I hope, it is Starman, because that's what you are. Thank you again.